bringing the trilogy of estate, tax, and investment planning together. Visit alphawealthgroup.com for a free report.
See Michelle Malkin, Sean Hannity, and Laura Logan at Freedom Summit 2019. Tickets on sale now at freedomsummitchicago.com.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. And over the weekend, Trump at the G7 summit in France, and the war of words and tariff increases escalated between the Chinese and President Trump and we Americans by extension, including with a reference to a 1977 federal statute, which Trump used as the basis to declare via Twitter, "I hereby order you, American companies, to start wrapping it up and moving back from China to the United States." Larry Kudlow on Face the Nation explaining that, it's not all as severe as the president's tone may have suggested.
In theory, that law exists, but that's not what the president said. He's asking American companies to take a fresh look at, frankly, moving out of China. Going someplace else.
That takes
preferably
years.
Coming home to America. It will take years. That is correct. And that's why there's no immediate action here. He just put that out there. Look, I've heard him say this time and time again the couple of years I've been working here. He said it to individual business. He said it to the big business groups. He's asking them to come home. Come back home to America. We're giving you low taxes and low regulations and an entrepreneurial environment. So, in a sense, this is nothing new. Maybe the way it was phrased was a little tougher than usual, but we come home to America. This is the best place to work and live and earn and invest.
Well, he said he'd declare a national emergency. I mean, he said it.
Well, in 1977, we had an act passed, a National Emergency Act. I have the absolute right to do that.
No, he didn't say he would. He said
he has
the right to do it.
Yeah.
That's the distinction. Not that I don't find the suggestion problematic. I do, and also the economists. I find them problematic too. Good grief! All of this our recession talk over the last couple of weeks, as the left and their D.C. press corps amplifiers have moved from Russia to racism to recession. I go back again to Frederick von Hayek's Nobel Prize in economics speech in what year, Amy? What year did he win the Nobel Prize in economics? 1974. That's right.
Right, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
You're a child.
He said to the assembled majesties and highnesses and ladies and gentlemen, "I must confess that if I had been consulted whether to establish a Nobel Prize in economics, I should have decidedly advised against it." I love this guy. "One reason was that I feared that such a prize, as I believe it is true of the activities of some of the great scientific foundations, would tend to accentuate the swings of scientific fashion." The Nobel Prize confers on an individual an authority which in economics no man ought to possess. He's talking about you, Paul Krugman. "This does not matter in the natural sciences. Here, the influence exercised by an individual is chiefly an influence on his fellow experts, and they will soon cut him down to size if he exceeds his competence. But the influence of the economist that mainly matters is an influence over laymen, politicians, journalists, civil servants, the public generally. There is no reason why a man who has made a distinctive contribution to economic science should be omnipotent in all problems of society, as the press tends to treat him, till in the end he may himself be persuaded to believe." This is the experts and the mystics, particularly in the dark arts, including economics, who were discarded with the election of Trump, and discarded based on performance. And it's the same thing with those who are predicting end days in the next decade, like Bolshevik Bernie Sanders. For more on all of the above, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend Scott the Cowguy Shellady, Fox Business contributor. Scott, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
Morning. So let's start with China before we continue to pile on the economics profession. The Trump also saying last night he got a call from Xi or some representative that we want to come back to the table and negotiate. Let's Let's not stay mad at one another and so forth. Um, he announced a trade deal, and small in scope, but significant just to show the ability to do it with Japan over the weekend. He talked with Boris Johnson about doing big, great trade deals with the UK under Boris Johnson's leadership. But China is still perplexing, and he's still committed to these sort of suicide bombings, as is President Xi. And I wonder how you pull all this out as the market is clearly telling the Trump administration, stop with the tariffs.
The market's telling the Trump administration, stop with the volatility. I mean, nobody does really well when every day seems to be a binary outcome, like right, yes or no, up or down. It gets too difficult to be an investor, whether it may be a short-term trader or a long-term investor, and that's the problem. So, I personally, and I'm on record of saying, I don't think we're going to get a deal anytime soon, and this could go past the election if he gets reelected. And there is a increasingly a larger chance, albeit still small, that we never get a deal done. And he's alluded to that by saying, come home. Having said that, we still trade much more with the numbers show, or at least the numbers that I've seen, that we trade much more with Mexico and Canada. So this importance upon a trade deal with China, albeit I guess is validated a little bit. There are a lot of other things out there that we should do, and I think he's done a pretty good job of trying to solidify some sort of group around him that's going to help him kind of maybe even put more, I don't know, pressure is not the right word, but China will see that things are getting done, and I think that, there is no answer to how we stop the $500 billion or $300 billion or whatever the amount is of intellectual property theft. I mean, everybody says that we want to end this thing, but nobody's come up with an idea about how to stop them and their bad behavior. That's always my problem, right? Yeah, I don't like this trade war. I don't like the tariffs, but I also hate the way that they've manipulated everybody else around the world for the last 30 years. So,
what are we going to have, the intellectual property police?
Well, I mean, and even if they agree to a deal, Amy, we all know that it's probably not going to hold up. They've got a long history of signing and resigning. So, this outcome is going to be difficult. It's going to be longer than everybody thinks, and it will be a drag. And unfortunately, I don't see it anytime soon.
Comrade Bernie Sanders rolled out a plan to end scourges like unemployment last week. His GND would, I think, do a nice job of eliminating our GDP. He is calling for a 100% switch to renewables by 2030, ban fracking, ban drilling offshore and on federal lands, ban imports and exports of fossil fuels. You think China's a problem. Cancel oil pipelines already being built, halt the permitting of new fossil fuel extraction, transportation, and refining infrastructure. And what you do is then you just transition. You can include 5 years of a wage guarantee for those transitioning out of those old industries for your college education, if they so desire, plus early retirement support for those who choose it. And that will end unemployment by creating 20 million jobs, just like that.
Wow. I mean, listen, without you even asking me, the scary story is that, I mean, yes, Trump's got a point when it comes to these tariffs and what China's been doing, but the Sanders plan or his Green New Deal or his Green New Garbage, that is absolutely shocking that it is even taken mildly seriously. I mean, it's scary. I mean, to think about, go back to, say, some of my agrarian roots. You can't, there's no battery that lasts long enough, even today or projected in the next few years, that will be able to take all the crops out of the ground. Fossil fuels, as you burn them, they get lighter. That's how we fly. It's easier to fly longer distances because the plane gets lighter. Batteries don't get lighter. How do you get rid of all these old batteries? I mean, this is so well not thought out. I can't believe it hasn't hit the headlines more about its ridiculousness compared to Trump trying to tame another world economy. I mean, it just boggles my mind.
Yeah, Trump said this morning about 4:30 a.m. I'm sure you weren't up, but we were. And he said that the EU.
Whoa, I was
maybe
up,
you were.
I was up.
All right, sorry, I'm wrong. I've said that the EU is going to be harder to bargain with on tariffs than China.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I've lived over there 15 of the last 30 years, Amy, and I'll tell you right now, those Europeans, that's the politics of no. They only just say no. They don't have an alternative. They don't have a better idea. But whatever comes to them, they say no because they want to perpetuate the swamp more than our Washington, D.C. folks want to perpetuate the swamp. And whatever's happening in the European Union today, it's all garbage. And I predict it was a bad idea to start the European Union. And I ultimately think that once Britain leaves, slowly but surely more countries are going to sign up to want to get out, and that whole thing is going to fall apart because it's a good idea but poorly implemented, and it's just not working.
Well, yeah, I wanted to get your opinion since you had spent so much time working in England and you've experienced Boris Johnson as mayor of London and you watch British politics pretty closely. Trump gave him the vote of confidence on Brexit. How does he do what Theresa May was unable to do? And if so, as you sort of started to discuss, what are the implications for the EU?
Well, they'll definitely leave under Boris Johnson. Unfortunately, and I've said this before, the way that Americans can look at it, when the Brits went to the polls and voted to leave the European Union, they then had to go get that plan ratified through their parliament. That would be like, President Trump being elected and then having to have Congress ratify that election. I mean, they were on a hiding to nothing, number one. Number two is that in her heart of hearts, as much as I did like Theresa May and I did vote for her, she did not want to leave Europe. She voted to stay in Europe. So then she was now bargaining for a position that she didn't truly believe in her heart of hearts. So when it came down to it and the brass tacks finally came out, she really didn't press Europe as hard as somebody, say, like Boris Johnson, who has always wanted to leave, might do. And I think he definitely will do. And I think that he'll leave under the World Trade Organization's hard Brexit come October 31st. The scaremongering about no food and no medicine to be able to come into the country, I think, is garbage. But at the end of the day, he does have in his heart of hearts the will to leave, and he will press the EU on things that he thinks that they need to do to let them. Now, this whole idea of a divorce and having to go ask for permission after your country's voted to leave is ridiculous anyway. So I think that he's probably the right guy, just because probably Theresa May was more of an intellect than he was or is. But he is, also more boorish, that he could just push it through regardless. And I think that's what the British people want now because they're so sick and tired of hearing about it. And an idea of going back to the country and having another referendum because you didn't get the referendum answer you wanted the first time around also makes people angry in Britain. So October 31st, come hell or high water, I think they'll definitely leave, and whether it's under a deal that, Boris pushes through, or he just says, we're going to leave under WTO rules. We're going to have a hard Brexit happening.
The passing of multi-billionaire David Koch, one of the two Koch brothers, on Friday, the reaction from intellectual circles. Brian Doherty, writing in Reason magazine, noted that the vast bulk of Koch's philanthropy was not political, hundreds of millions of dollars for cancer research. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer 25 years ago.
He even set out the 2016 presidential race. I'm just saying, he did other things.
Major arts and sciences institutions, museums, schools, public television. Much of the philanthropy actually centered in New York City, pretty hostile to him, but that was his home for decades. And by the way, the assessment of the Koch brothers' impact on our politics is so vastly overstated. It's absurd. They haven't been particularly effective. They haven't been particularly good at building infrastructure, despite generating all the money from all the rich people who want to be associated with the Koch brothers. I know just from internally how they work and how some of their organizations work, they just haven't been, not in any sustained way. But the reaction from Bill Maher is indicative of the reaction from the intelligentsia, such as it is. Yesterday, David Koch, who funded climate science deniers for decades, died of prostate cancer. Mourners have been asked that in lieu of flowers to just leave their car engines running. Bette Midler, I'm sorry to give others, or she said, I tweeted Charles Koch had died instead of David Koch. I'm sorry to give others false hope. Guess it was just wistful thinking as we watched the Amazon rainforest pouring. All the global warming culprits are foremost in one's mind. The New York Magazine had a big write-up of David Koch's monstrous legacy and so on and so forth. He was just greedy. That's all he was about, was greed. Sort of remarkable statements from, I guess they're not that remarkable anymore, but still, it's telling statements from those cultural and media mavens.
I mean, how bad does that smack of hypocrisy? the left is, this is just because we were on the topic. I'll go back to Bill Maher hoping for a recession and millions of people being, at least hundreds of thousands being thrown out of work, so that he can get the recession he'd like and get rid of Trump, and/or celebrating the death of somebody who's deemed to be a big donor on the right is akin to what Margaret Thatcher said probably more than 30 years ago. And the left would rather the poor be poorer as long as the rich were less rich, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they would,
and they were in power. Yeah,
right. But they don't care how much they hurt themselves as long as they can hurt the rich. That is their mantra, and it still is to this day. And it just came out of Bill Maher's mouth, and he just admitted it. And that's unfortunate. But they would rather hurt themselves as long as they can hurt the rich, and that's not a plan. That's not a way to run something. That's not a way to be in power. And to say the things that they've said is, again, smacks of hypocrisy, and I can't understand how smart people can't see that. It just doesn't make sense to me. So that's and I think that's why they will ultimately end up wallowing again, and I think that we'll have another 4 years of a conservative leader.
All right. He is Scott the Cow Guy Shellady, Fox Business contributor. Scott, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
See ya.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Balance of nature. Changing the world, one life at a time.
I've been holding off on buying vitamins because I figure, you know what? All the vitamins I need are